The shotgun blast that killed Faith's husband 3 years ago had also silenced her voice, and she had not spoken a single word since that sweltering July afternoon in 1879, when the outlaws rode through Downeyville, California, leaving destruction in their wake. Faith Winters stood behind the counter of her modest dry goods store, her hands moving mechanically as she sorted through bolts of fabric that a merchant had delivered that morning. The sun streamed through the dusty windows, catching the golden highlights in her honey-colored hair that she kept pulled back in a simple bun. At 26 years old, she had learned to communicate through gestures, through written notes scrawled on small pieces of paper she kept in her apron pocket, through the expressive language of her green eyes that held depths of sorrow few people bothered to notice anymore. The people of Downeyville had tried at first. They had coaxed, pleaded, even brought in a doctor from Sacramento who examined her throat and declared there was nothing physically wrong with her vocal cords. But Faith had retreated into silence like a turtle into its shell, and eventually the town had given up. They stopped asking questions. They stopped expecting answers. They learned to accept her nods and headshakes, her hastily written notes, her silence. The bell above the door chimed, and Faith looked up to see Mrs. Henderson entering with her usual list of complaints already forming on her lips. Faith reached for her notepad and pencil, preparing to take the woman's order without a word, just as she had done hundreds of times before. "Faith, dear, I need 3 yards of that blue calico, and do make sure it is the good quality this time. Last month's fabric frayed something terrible." Mrs. Henderson did not wait for any acknowledgement, never had. "And I heard there is a new ranch hand working at the Morrison place. Kade Johnson, they say his name is. Came up from Texas, though Lord knows why anyone would leave Texas for California. Different kind of heat here, I always say." Faith wrote down the order, her hand steady despite the way her heart had lurched at the mention of a stranger. Strangers made her nervous. They did not understand her silence, and their questions felt like accusations. She measured out the fabric with practiced efficiency, folding it neatly and wrapping it in brown paper. Mrs. Henderson continued her monologue, as she always did, requiring no participation from Faith. "They say he is quite the horseman. Mr. Morrison hired him specifically to break those wild mustangs he bought last month. 28 years old and still not married, which seems peculiar for a man of his age, but perhaps he has been too busy with ranch work." Faith accepted the coins Mrs. Henderson placed on the counter, making change and handing it back without meeting the woman's eyes. The older woman finally left, the bell chiming again, and Faith released a breath she had not realized she was holding. The afternoon passed slowly, as most afternoons did. A few more customers came and went. Faith served them all in silence, her notepad always at the ready. When the sun began to sink behind the Sierra Nevada mountains that surrounded the small mining town, she locked the front door and retreated to the small room behind the store where she lived. The room was sparse but clean, containing only a narrow bed, a washstand, a small stove, and a rocking chair that had belonged to her mother. Faith lit the oil lamp and sat down at the tiny table, opening the ledger where she kept track of the store's finances. Numbers were easier than words. Numbers did not require her to speak. She had just finished her calculations when she heard the sound of raised voices outside. Faith tensed, her body remembering the violence that had stolen everything from her. She moved to the window and peered out into the gathering darkness. 3 men stood in the street, clearly drunk, arguing about something she could not quite make out. Her fingers tightened on the windowsill as fear crept up her spine. Then another figure appeared, taller than the others, moving with a confidence that suggested he knew how to handle himself. even in the dim light from the street lamps. Faith could see the way he positioned himself between the arguing men, his hands held out in a calming gesture. His voice was too low for her to hear the words, but whatever he said seemed to work. The three drunks stumbled off in different directions, and the tall stranger stood there for a moment, watching to make sure they actually left. He turned then, and the lamplight fell across his face. Strong jaw, dark hair that touched his collar, and eyes that seemed to take in everything around him with a quiet intensity. This had to be Kade Johnson, the new ranch hand Mrs. Henderson had mentioned. As if sensing her watching, he glanced up at her window. Faith jerked back, her heart pounding, but not before their eyes met for just a moment. She forced herself to breathe slowly, to calm the panic that always came when she felt seen, truly seen. After a few minutes, she dared another look, but the street was empty. The stranger had gone. That night, Faith dreamed of the day Thomas died. She dreamed of the gunshots, the screaming, the smell of gunpowder and blood. She dreamed of opening her mouth to scream and finding no sound would come. She woke gasping, her nightgown damp with sweat, and sat in the darkness until dawn broke over the mountains. The next morning started like any other. Faith opened the store at 7 o'clock sharp, sweeping the wooden floor and arranging her wares. She had just finished when the bell chimed and Kade Johnson walked through the door. He was taller than she had thought, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that spoke of hard work. He wore typical ranch clothes, denim trousers and a faded blue shirt, with a worn leather vest and a hat he removed as he entered. His boots were dusty from the road. "Morning, madam," he said, his voice a deep rumble with a slight Texas drawl. "I am looking for some work gloves if you have them. The ones I brought with me are about worn through." Faith nodded and moved to the shelf where she kept gloves, her movements quick and efficient. She pulled down 3 different pairs, laying them on the counter for his inspection. Her hands trembled slightly and she clasped them together to still them. Kade approached the counter, examining the gloves carefully. "These look good," he said, selecting the sturdiest pair. He pulled out some coins to pay, then paused, looking at her with those intense eyes. "You are Mrs. Winters, right?" "The shopkeeper," Faith nodded, reaching for her notepad automatically. "Mr. Morrison mentioned you run a good store, said you are fair with prices and always have quality goods." He placed the coins on the counter, the exact amount. "I appreciate that. Too many places try to cheat newcomers." She wrote quickly, "Thank you. Welcome to Downeyville." Kade took the note she handed him, reading it carefully. His expression did not change to one of pity or confusion like so many others. Instead, he simply nodded. "Thank you for the welcome. I appreciate it." He paused, then added, "If it is all right with you, I prefer writing over talking half the time anyway. Words get a man in trouble more often than not." Something in Faith's chest loosened slightly. She found herself almost smiling, though the expression felt foreign on her face. Kade tipped his hat. "I will likely be back soon. Mr. Morrison keeps me busy and I seem to go through supplies quickly. Have a good day, Mrs. Winters." After he left, Faith stood very still, staring at the door. The encounter had been so different from what she had expected. He had not pushed, had not demanded she speak, had not looked at her like she was broken. He had simply accepted her note and moved on as if written communication was the most natural thing in the world. Over the next 2 weeks, Kade became a regular customer. He needed rope, then nails, then leather oil for his saddle. Each time he greeted her politely, conducted his business, and left without making her feel uncomfortable. Sometimes he would comment on the weather or mention something happening at the Morrison Ranch, not seeming to expect a response, just sharing information the way neighbors did. Faith found herself looking forward to his visits, though she would not have admitted it to anyone. There was something calming about his presence, something steady and reliable. He never rushed her, never showed impatience when she had to write out longer responses. One afternoon in early August, he came in looking more serious than usual. "Mrs. Winters, I have a question that might seem forward, but I am going to ask it anyway." He took off his hat, turning it in his hands. "There is a dance next Saturday night at the community hall. I know I am new in town and do not know many people yet. I wondered if you might consider attending with me." "Not as anything serious," he added quickly. "Just as a way for both of us to be social without having to navigate it alone." Faith froze, her mind racing. She had not been to a social gathering since before Thomas died. The thought of all those people, all that noise, all those potential questions made her stomach clench with anxiety. But there was something in the way Kade asked, something genuine and kind, that made her hesitate rather than immediately shake her head. She reached for her notepad. "I do not dance." "Neither do I," Kade said with a slight smile. "Two left feet, my mother always said, but we could sit on the sidelines and watch everyone else make fools of themselves. Maybe have some of whatever desserts the ladies bring." Mrs. Morrison mentioned something about a pie competition. Faith bit her lip, considering. Part of her wanted to say yes desperately, wanted to break out of the isolated pattern her life had become. Another part of her was terrified. Kade seemed to sense her hesitation. "Tell you what, you think about it. If you decide you would like to go, just put a blue ribbon in your window here. I will see it when I ride past on Friday. If there is no ribbon, no harm done. I will not take it personally." After he left, Faith sat down in her rocking chair and tried to calm her racing thoughts. When was the last time someone had invited her anywhere? When was the last time someone had given her the space to make a decision without pressure? She spent the next 3 days thinking about it, weighing her fear against her loneliness. On Friday morning, she tied a blue ribbon to the curtain rod in her front window. That evening, Kade stopped by just before closing time. "I saw the ribbon," he said simply. "I will pick you up at 6 o'clock on Saturday. Wear whatever makes you comfortable." Faith nodded, already second-guessing her decision but unable to take it back now. Saturday evening arrived too quickly. Faith changed her dress 3 times before settling on a simple green cotton that matched her eyes. She had not worn anything other than practical work clothes in so long that even this modest dress felt elaborate. She brushed out her hair and pinned it up carefully, allowing a few soft tendrils to frame her face. When Kade arrived with a small wagon, he climbed down and offered her his hand to help her up. "You look very nice, Mrs. Winters," he said, and there was genuine warmth in his voice that made her cheeks flush. The ride to the community hall was short, and Kade filled the silence with easy conversation about the horses he was working with at the Morrison Ranch. "There is this one mare, a paint with the most stubborn streak I have ever seen. She threw me twice yesterday, but I think we are starting to understand each other. It is all about patience and listening to what the horse is trying to tell you." Faith listened, grateful that he did not seem to expect her to respond. His voice was soothing, and his obvious passion for his work came through in every word. The community hall was already crowded when they arrived. Musicians were tuning their instruments in the corner, and tables laden with food lined one wall. Faith felt her anxiety spike as faces turned toward them, curious about seeing the silent widow with the new ranch hand. Kade must have felt her tense because he leaned down slightly and said quietly, "We will just find a spot to sit, and if you want to leave at any time, you just let me know." No questions asked. They found chairs along the wall, and Kade brought them each a glass of punch. True to his word, He did not try to drag her onto the dance floor when the music started. Instead, he sat beside her, occasionally pointing out humorous moments, like when old Mr. Peterson attempted a particularly ambitious dance move and nearly took out 3 other couples. Mrs. Henderson approached them during a break in the music, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Faith, how wonderful to see you out and about. And Mr. Johnson, are not you going to ask this lovely woman to dance?" Before Faith could reach for her notepad, Kade said smoothly, "I am afraid I would only embarrass us both, Mrs. Henderson. I have many skills, but dancing is not among them. We are quite content to enjoy the music from here." Mrs. Henderson looked like she wanted to say more, but Kade's polite but firm tone discouraged further prying. She moved on to gossip with other ladies, leaving Faith relieved and grateful. "Thank you," she mouthed silently to Kade. He just nodded, understanding her perfectly without sound. As the evening wore on, Faith found herself relaxing. She even smiled at some of Kade's quiet observations about the other townspeople. He had a dry sense of humor that surprised her, nothing mean-spirited, just genuinely funny observations about human nature. When the pie judging began, Kade insisted they sample as many as possible for research purposes. They tried apple, cherry, peach, and a surprisingly good vinegar pie that neither of them had encountered before. Faith found herself almost laughing at Kade's exaggerated expressions of culinary contemplation. As they sat there with their pie plates, a little girl of about 5 approached them shyly. "Mister, will you dance with me? My papa is tired, and Mama is talking to the other ladies." Kade looked genuinely panicked, and Faith had to cover her mouth to hide her smile. "Well, little miss, I am not very good at dancing." "That is okay," the girl said earnestly. "I am not either, I only just learned." Kade glanced at Faith, who made a gentle shooing motion with her hands. With a resigned sigh, he stood and let the little girl lead him to the dance floor. Faith watched as he carefully held the child's hand, moving through a simplified version of the waltz with exaggerated seriousness that made the little girl giggle. When the dance ended, the child hugged his leg and ran back to her mother. Kade returned to his seat looking slightly embarrassed. "So much for not dancing." Faith pulled out her notepad. "That was very kind. She will remember that." "She reminded me of my niece back in Texas," Kade said softly. "I have not seen her in almost 2 years. I miss her," Faith wrote. "Why did you leave Texas?" Kade was quiet for a moment, his expression growing more serious. "My older brother ran the family ranch. When our father died, he made it clear that there was only room for one boss, and it was not going to be me. We had different ideas about how things should be done. Rather than fight about it and tear the family apart, I decided to find my own way. California seemed like a good place for a fresh start." Faith nodded slowly, understanding that need for a fresh start perhaps better than anyone. "What about you?" Kade asked gently. "Have you always lived in Downeyville?" Faith hesitated, then began to write. She had not shared her story with anyone in years, but something about Kade made her want to try. She wrote about growing up in Sacramento, about meeting Thomas when he came through selling mining equipment, about how they had fallen in love and moved to Downeyville to start their life together. She wrote about how happy they had been, about their plans for the future. Then she stopped, her pencil hovering over the paper. She could not write about the rest, not yet. Kade seemed to understand. "You do not have to tell me anything you are not ready to share," he said quietly. "Everyone has parts of their past that hurt too much to talk about." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the dancers. As the evening grew late, Kade asked, "Are you ready to head home?" Faith nodded, and they made their way back to the wagon. The night air was cool and pleasant after the warmth of the crowded hall. Stars blazed overhead in the clear mountain sky. "I enjoyed this evening," Kade said as they drove back toward town. "I hope you did too." Faith nodded emphatically, surprising herself with how true it was. She had enjoyed herself. For a few hours she had felt almost normal again. When they reached her store, Kade helped her down from the wagon. "Mrs. Winters, I would like to call on you again if you would allow it. Maybe we could have dinner sometime. I am a decent cook, learned from my mother. I could prepare something at the ranch and you could join me." Mr. Morrison would not mind. He has been trying to get me to socialize more anyway. Faith felt her heart racing. This was more than just accompanying each other to a public event. This was Kade expressing genuine interest in spending time with her. Part of her wanted to refuse, to retreat back into the safety of her isolation. But a larger part, the part that had felt alive for the first time in years tonight, wanted desperately to say yes. She pulled out her notepad one more time. "I would like that." Kade's smile was warm and genuine. "How about next Sunday afternoon? I will send word with Mr. Morrison during the week to confirm." After he left, Faith climbed the stairs to her room, her mind swirling with emotions she had thought long dead. She was terrified and excited and hopeful all at once. She lay in bed, unable to sleep, thinking about Kade's kindness, his patience, the way he had looked at her like she was a whole person rather than a damaged curiosity. The following week passed in a blur of anticipation and anxiety. Kade came by the store twice for supplies, and each time he confirmed their Sunday plans with genuine enthusiasm. Faith found herself paying more attention to her appearance, taking extra care with her hair, pressing her better dresses. Sunday dawned bright and clear. Faith closed the store at noon and changed into her nicest dress, a pale yellow cotton with tiny white flowers. She braided her hair and wound it into a crown around her head, allowing a few curls to escape at her temples. Kade arrived right on time, driving a small buggy this time instead of the work wagon. "Mr. Morrison insisted I take his courting buggy," he said with a slight grin. "Said it was more appropriate for a Sunday outing." The word courting made Faith's stomach flutter, but she said nothing, just allowed him to help her into the buggy. The Morrison Ranch was about 3 miles outside of town, nestled in a valley with good grazing land and a creek running through it. The main house was a substantial 2-story structure, and there were several outbuildings including a large barn and a bunkhouse where the ranch hands stayed. Kade drove past the main house to a smaller cabin set back among some pine trees. "Mr. Morrison lets me use this place," he explained. "It is not much, but it is private and comfortable." The cabin was indeed small, just 2 rooms, but it was clean and well-maintained. A table was set for 2 near the window, and Faith could smell something delicious cooking. "I made beef stew," Kade said, suddenly looking uncertain. "And biscuits. I hope you like it. I also have canned peaches for dessert." Faith smiled and wrote, "It smells wonderful." They sat down to eat, and Faith was surprised by how good the food was. Kade had not been exaggerating about his cooking skills. As they ate, he talked more about his work with the horses, about his family back in Texas, about the places he had traveled. "I spent a year in Montana before coming here," he said. "Beautiful country, but the winters are brutal. I prefer California's climate much more." After dinner, they sat on the small porch of the cabin, watching the horses graze in the nearby pasture. The afternoon sun was warm but not oppressive, and a gentle breeze rustled through the trees. "Can I ask you something?" Kade said after a while. "And please, feel free not to answer if it is too personal." Faith tensed slightly but nodded. "The people in town, they treat you like you are invisible sometimes, like your silence means you do not have opinions or feelings. Does that bother you?" Faith felt tears prick her eyes unexpectedly. She reached for her notepad with shaking hands. Yes, very much. They stopped seeing me as a person. They see me as the silent widow, nothing more. Kade read her words carefully. I thought so. I have noticed it, the way they talk around you rather than to you. The way they make decisions for you without asking. It does not seem right. Faith wrote, "You are the first person in 3 years to really see me, to treat me like I still matter." You do matter, Kade said firmly. Your voice matters, whether it comes out in words or writing or any other way. And I want you to know that I will always listen, in whatever form you need to communicate. The tears Faith had been holding back spilled over. She had not cried in front of anyone since Thomas's funeral. She had learned to cry only in the dark privacy of her room, silent sobs that no one could hear. But here, with Kade, she felt safe enough to let the tears fall. Kade did not try to stop her or tell her not to cry. He simply reached over and gently took her hand, holding it as she wept. When the tears finally subsided, he handed her his handkerchief without a word. Faith wiped her eyes, embarrassed by her outburst. She wrote, "I am sorry." "Do not be," Kade said. "Tears are nothing to apologize for. They are just another way of expressing what words cannot." They sat together until the sun began to sink toward the horizon. As Kade drove her back to town, Faith felt something shifting inside her. The wall she had built around her heart was developing cracks, and light was beginning to seep through. Over the next several weeks, Kade and Faith fell into a pattern. He would visit the store regularly, and they would have Sunday dinners together at his cabin. Sometimes they would take walks along the creek, or he would show her the progress he was making with the horses. Faith began to bring her notepad less frequently, communicating more through gestures and expressions that Kade seemed to understand intuitively. One evening in late September, as they sat watching the sunset from his porch, Kade said, "I have been thinking about something. I have noticed that you seem more relaxed out here, away from town. Is it easier for you when there are not so many people around?" Faith nodded, grateful that he had noticed. The people in town, they have expectations. They have this idea of who you are supposed to be, and they do not leave room for you to be anything else. But out here, you can just be yourself. Faith pulled out her notepad. "Out here, I do not feel broken. In town, everyone looks at me and sees what is missing. You look at me and see what is there." Kade turned to face her fully. "Faith, can I tell you something? I have not felt this comfortable with anyone in a very long time. Most people want me to be someone I am not, to fit into some mold they have created. My brother wanted me to be his loyal follower. Other employers wanted me to be just a hired hand with no thoughts of my own. But with you, I can just be Kade. No pretenses, no expectations." Faith felt warmth spreading through her chest. She wrote, "I feel the same way." "I know we have not known each other very long," Kade continued, "but I care about you. I want to keep spending time with you, getting to know you better." "Is that something you want too?" Faith's hand trembled as she wrote. "Yes, very much." Kade smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. He reached out and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "I am not going to rush you or push you. We will take this at whatever pace feels right to you." As autumn deepened and the leaves turned gold and red in the surrounding mountains, Faith found herself opening up more and more to Kade. She began writing longer entries in her notepad, sharing memories and thoughts she had kept locked away for years. One Sunday in October, she wrote about Thomas's death for the first time. Her hand shook as she described the outlaws who had ridden into town looking for someone who owed them money. How they had started shooting when the sheriff tried to intervene. How Thomas had pushed her behind the counter to protect her, and how a stray bullet had found him anyway. How she had screamed and screamed until her voice simply gave out and never returned. Kade read every word, his jaw tight with suppressed emotion. When he finished, he pulled Faith into his arms and held her while she cried. "I am so sorry you went through that," he whispered against her hair. "No one should have to experience such horror." Faith clung to him, absorbing his strength and warmth. In his arms, she felt protected in a way she had not since before Thomas died. But it was different too. With Thomas, she had felt cherished and safe. With Kade, she felt seen and understood on a deeper level. When she finally pulled back, she wrote, "After it happened, people tried to get me to talk. The doctor, the minister, my friends. They pushed and prodded, trying to fix me, but I could not do it. Every time I tried to speak, I would hear the gunshots again, smell the blood. My voice was tied to that trauma and I could not separate them. Eventually, I stopped trying. It was easier to be silent." "Has anyone ever just listened to you?" Kade asked. "Really listened without trying to fix you or change you?" Faith shook her head. "Then that is what I want to do. I want to listen to whatever you have to say, in whatever way you need to say it. And I want you to know that you do not have to find your voice again for me. I care about you exactly as you are right now." But even as Kade said those words, Faith felt something stirring inside her. His acceptance, his patience, his genuine interest in her thoughts and feelings were watering seeds that had lain dormant for years. She found herself wanting to try again, not because anyone was forcing her, but because she wanted to share herself with him fully. That night, alone in her room, Faith stood in front of her small mirror and whispered, "Hello." The sound was barely audible, hoarse from disuse, and it made her throat ache. But it was sound. It was her voice, rusty and uncertain, but still there. She did not tell Kade right away. She wanted to be sure, wanted to practice in private before she revealed this tentative progress. Over the next few weeks, she would whisper to herself in her room, slowly rebuilding the connection between her thoughts and her voice. November brought cooler weather to the Sierra Nevada foothills. One Sunday, Kade suggested they take a ride up into the higher elevations to see the changing leaves before the first snow fell. Faith agreed eagerly, always enjoying their time away from the prying eyes of town. Kade saddled 2 horses, choosing a gentle mare for Faith. They rode for several hours, climbing into the mountains until they reached a meadow that took Faith's breath away. The aspen trees were brilliant gold against the deep blue sky, and a small waterfall tumbled down rocks at the far end of the clearing. "I found this place a few weeks ago," Kade said as they dismounted. "I wanted to share it with you." They spread a blanket on the grass and ate the lunch Kade had packed. The air was crisp and clean, scented with pine and the earthy smell of fallen leaves. Faith felt more at peace than she had in years. After they ate, Kade lay back on the blanket, his hands behind his head, looking up at the sky. "Faith, I need to tell you something." She looked at him, concerned by his serious tone. "I am falling in love with you," he said simply. "I have tried to take things slow, to not rush you, but I cannot keep this to myself anymore. I love the way you see the world. I love your strength and your resilience. I love that you communicate with your whole being, not just words. I love who I am when I am with you." He sat up, turning to face her. "I know you might not feel the same way yet, and that is all right. I just needed you to know." Faith's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She reached for her notepad with trembling hands and wrote, "I love you too. I have for weeks but was afraid to admit it. You have given me back something I thought was lost forever. Not my voice, but myself." Kade read her words and his face lit up with joy. "Really?" Faith nodded, tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears this time. She set down her notepad and cupped his face in her hands, looking into his eyes so he could see the truth there. Kade leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. but Faith did not want to pull away. She met him halfway, and their lips touched in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and full of promise. When they finally separated, both of them were smiling. Kade pulled her close and they sat together, Faith's head resting on his shoulder, watching the waterfall and the golden leaves dancing in the breeze. "I want to marry you," Kade said after a while. "Not right away, not until you are ready, but I want you to know that is where my heart is heading." Faith reached for her notepad. "I want that too, but I need time." "All the time you need," Kade assured her. "I am not going anywhere." As they rode back down the mountain that evening, Faith felt like she was floating. She had not imagined she would ever feel this way again, ever trust someone enough to let them fully into her heart. But Kade had been so patient, so understanding, that her walls had crumbled without her even realizing it was happening. The weeks leading up to Christmas were busy at the store. Faith sold fabric for dresses, toys for children, special supplies for holiday baking. Kade helped her decorate the store window with pine boughs and ribbon, and seeing them work together made the townspeople start to gossip in earnest. "I heard they are courting," Mrs. Henderson told anyone who would listen. "Can you imagine? That poor man, marrying a woman who cannot even speak. How will she talk to their children?" Faith overheard this conversation while restocking shelves, and it stung more than she wanted to admit. But when she mentioned it to Kade later, he just shook his head. "People fear what they do not understand," he said. "They cannot imagine a relationship that does not fit their narrow definition of normal, but our relationship is not about them. It is about us and what works for us." On Christmas Eve, the town held a special service at the church. Faith had not attended church since Thomas's funeral, but Kade asked if she would go with him, and she agreed. They sat together in the back pew, and Faith was acutely aware of the stares and whispers. The minister spoke about hope and new beginnings, about the miracle of light coming into darkness. Faith found herself actually listening, finding meaning in the words that had seemed empty for so long. After the service, as they walked back to Faith's store, snow began to fall. Large, soft flakes drifted down from the dark sky, catching in Faith's hair and on Kade's shoulders. "I have something for you," Kade said, pulling a small wrapped package from his coat pocket. "I know we said we would not exchange gifts, but I could not help myself." Faith unwrapped the package to find a beautiful leather-bound journal, much nicer than the simple notepads she usually used. Inside the front cover, Kade had written, "For all the words you have yet to share. Love, Kade." Faith felt tears welling up again. She pulled out her own small package, which she had hidden in her reticule. "I did not listen either," she tried to say, but only a whisper came out. Kade's eyes widened. "Faith, did you just—" She nodded, her hand flying to her throat in surprise. She had not meant to try speaking aloud yet, but the words had slipped out naturally in her excitement. "Your voice," Kade said softly. "I heard your voice." Faith's hands shook as she unwrapped her own gift for him. It was a pocket watch that had belonged to her father, the only valuable thing she had left from her family. She had had it engraved with his initials, KJ. Kade held it carefully, clearly understanding the significance of such a gift. "Faith, I cannot accept this. It is too precious." She shook her head and whispered again, stronger this time, "Please, I want you to have it." Kade pulled her into his arms right there on the snowy street, not caring who might see. "Your voice," he said again, sounding awed. "You are speaking again." "Only with you," Faith whispered against his chest. "Only when I feel safe." "Then I will make sure you always feel safe," Kade promised. That night, Faith sat in her room and practiced speaking aloud, marveling at the sound of her own voice. It was rusty and uncertain, and sometimes the words caught in her throat, but it was there. Kade had not demanded it, had not pushed for it, had not even suggested she needed to change. But his complete acceptance had created a space where she felt safe enough to try. The new year of 1883 brought changes. Kade asked Mr. Morrison about the possibility of buying some land adjacent to the ranch to start his own small operation. Mr. Morrison, who had grown fond of Kade, offered to sell him 20 acres at a fair price, with the option to buy more in the future. "I want to build something of my own," Kade explained to Faith as they looked over the land he hoped to purchase. "Not a huge ranch like my brother has, but something manageable. A place where I can raise horses and cattle, build a life, build a home." He turned to her, taking both her hands in his. "Faith Winters, I love you with everything I am. Will you marry me? Will you help me build this life, this home, this future?" Faith did not reach for her notepad. Instead, she spoke aloud, her voice still quiet but growing stronger. "Yes, Kade Johnson, I will marry you." They were married in March of 1883 in a simple ceremony at the church with just a few close friends present. Faith wore a dress of pale blue silk that she had sewn herself, and Kade wore his best suit with the pocket watch she had given him tucked safely inside. When the minister asked if she would take Kade as her husband, Faith spoke clearly. "I will." The gathered guests gasped. They had not known she had regained her voice. Mrs. Henderson burst into tears, whether from joy or shock, Faith could not tell. After the ceremony, at the small reception held at the community hall, several townspeople approached Faith with a mixture of apology and congratulation. "Faith, I am so sorry," said Mrs. Patterson, who ran the boarding house. "We should have tried harder to include you, to really listen to you. We gave up too easily." Faith squeezed the woman's hand. "It is all right," she said softly. "I was not ready before, but Kade helped me find my way back." "How did he do it?" someone asked. "What made you able to talk again?" Faith looked over at Kade, who was talking with Mr. Morrison near the refreshment table. "He did not try to fix me. He just listened. He valued what I had to say, whether I wrote it or signed it or eventually spoke it. He made me feel like I mattered again, like my voice was worth hearing. And once I felt that, truly felt that, the words started coming back." The months that followed were busy and happy. Kade worked on building a house on his new land, and Faith helped him plan every detail. She continued running her store during the week, but on Sundays and evenings, she would come out to the property and they would work together. The house was modest but well built, with 3 bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a front porch that looked out over the valley. Kade built it with his own hands with help from some of the other ranchers, and Faith sewed curtains for the windows and braided rugs for the floors. They moved in just before summer, and Faith sold her store to a young couple who had recently arrived in Downeyville. She did not need it anymore. Her life was here now with Kade, building something new. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. Faith still had days when speaking was difficult, when the memories would overwhelm her, and she would retreat into silence. But Kade never pushed. He would simply hand her a notepad or wait patiently until she was ready to try again. "Your voice comes and goes like the tide," he told her once, "and that is all right. I love you in the speaking and in the silence." Faith also discovered that she had a talent for working with horses. Kade taught her how to approach the wild mustangs, how to read their body language, how to communicate without words. She found it therapeutic, this silent communication with creatures who did not judge or have expectations. One horse in particular bonded with her, a gray mare with intelligent eyes who had been too skittish for most people to handle. Faith named her Silver and spent hours each day earning the horse's trust. Eventually, Silver would come when Faith called, would nuzzle her hand looking for treats, would stand calmly while Faith brushed her coat. "You have a gift," Kade said, watching Faith work with the mare. You understand what it is like to be misunderstood, to be afraid. The horses sense that. By the time their first anniversary arrived, Faith was speaking regularly, though still quietly. She would chat with Kade over breakfast, sing softly while doing housework, and even engage in brief conversations with neighbors when they visited. "I never thought I would hear my own voice again," she told Kade one night as they sat on their porch watching the stars. "I thought that part of me was dead." "It was not dead," Kade said, his arm around her shoulders. "Just sleeping, waiting for the right time to wake up." In the fall of 1884, Faith realized she was pregnant. The news filled her with both joy and terror. She worried about whether she would be a good mother, whether her voice would hold up under the stress and exhaustion of caring for a baby. Kade sensed her fears. "You will be an amazing mother," he assured her. "You have so much love to give, and you understand better than anyone how important it is to really listen to someone, to pay attention to what they need." Their son was born in May of 1885, a healthy baby boy with dark hair like his father and green eyes like his mother. They named him Samuel Thomas Johnson, honoring Faith's late husband and giving their son a name that meant heard by God. Faith discovered that motherhood brought its own form of communication. Samuel did not need words. He needed touch and warmth and the sound of her heartbeat. She sang lullabies to him in her soft voice, growing stronger with each passing day. She talked to him constantly, narrating her actions, describing the world around them. "Look at the horses, Samuel. See how they run. Your papa is teaching them to be gentle and strong, just like he taught your mama." Kade was a devoted father, taking Samuel out to the barn as soon as the baby was old enough, showing him the horses and cattle, talking to him about the land and the life they were building. When Samuel was 6 months old, Faith received an unexpected letter. It was from Thomas's mother, whom Faith had not heard from since the funeral. The older woman wrote that she had heard Faith had remarried and had a child, and she wanted to meet her grandson. She asked if she could visit. Faith's first instinct was to refuse. Thomas's mother had been kind but distant after the shooting, uncomfortable with Faith's silence, unsure how to relate to her. But as Faith thought about it, she realized she had changed. She was not the same broken woman Mrs. Winters had known. She showed the letter to Kade. "What do you think I should do?" "I think you should do whatever feels right to you," Kade said. "But if you want my opinion, I think it might be healing for both of you. She lost her son. You lost your husband. Maybe you can help each other by sharing Samuel." Faith wrote back, inviting Mrs. Winters to visit in the spring. When Thomas's mother arrived, she was a frailer, older version of the woman Faith remembered, but her eyes lit up when she saw Samuel, and tears streamed down her face. "He is beautiful," she whispered. "Absolutely beautiful." They sat on the porch, and Faith told her about her life now, about Kade, about how she had found her voice again. Mrs. Winters listened, truly listened, in a way she had not been capable of doing 3 years earlier. "I am so sorry, Faith," the older woman said. "I should have been there for you after Thomas died, but I was drowning in my own grief, and your silence frightened me. I did not know how to help you." "I do not think anyone could have helped me then," Faith said gently. "I had to find my own way through it. But I have found it now, and I am happy. I will always love Thomas and treasure the time we had, but Kade has given me a new life, a new beginning." Mrs. Winters stayed for a week, and by the time she left, she and Faith had rebuilt their relationship on a stronger foundation. She promised to visit regularly and asked Faith to write to her about Samuel's milestones. The years passed quickly. Samuel grew into a curious, energetic boy who loved the horses and followed his father everywhere. In 1887, Faith gave birth to twin girls, Lily and Rose, who filled the house with laughter and noise. Faith's voice grew stronger with each passing year. She became known in the community not as the silent widow, but as Kade Johnson's capable wife, the woman with a special talent for horses, the mother who always had time to listen to her children. She never forgot what it was like to be unheard, and she made sure her children always knew their voices mattered. She would sit with them for hours, listening to their stories and their concerns, giving them her full attention in a way she wished more people had given her. Kade's ranch prospered. What had started as a small operation grew steadily as he gained a reputation for raising quality horses. He never built it as large as his brother's ranch in Texas, but he built it with integrity and care, and it provided well for their family. One evening, when Samuel was 8 and the twins were 5, the family gathered on the porch as they often did after supper. The children played in the yard while Faith and Kade sat together on the swing he had built. "You ever think about how different your life might have been?" Kade asked. "If you had never lost your voice, if we had never met?" Faith considered the question seriously. "I think about it sometimes. Part of me wishes I had never had to go through that trauma, never had to lose Thomas, never had to experience that kind of silence. But another part of me knows that everything I went through made me who I am today. It made me stronger, more empathetic, more aware of how precious communication really is." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "And it brought me to you. If I had not been the silent shopkeeper, you might not have noticed me. You certainly would not have taken the time to really get to know me the way you did." "I like to think I would have noticed you anyway," Kade said with a smile. "But you are right that your silence made me pay attention differently. It made me listen with more than just my ears." Samuel called out then, asking his father to come see something he had found in the grass. Kade stood, pressing a kiss to Faith's forehead before joining his son. Faith watched her family, her heart full. Samuel was showing Kade a beetle, the twins were chasing fireflies, and the sun was setting behind the mountains in brilliant shades of orange and pink. This was her life now, full of voices and laughter and love. She thought back to that day when Kade first walked into her store, how terrified she had been of this stranger, how certain she was that she would never speak again. And yet here she was, calling out to her daughters to be careful near the fence, answering Samuel's questions about whether beetles could swim, discussing dinner plans with Kade. Her voice had returned, but not because anyone had forced it or demanded it. It had returned because Kade had given her something more important than pressure or expectations. He had given her patience, acceptance, and unconditional love. He had shown her that she was valuable as she was, and that knowledge had freed her to become even more. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Faith called her family inside. The children needed baths and bedtime stories, and she had promised to read them a new book that had arrived from Sacramento. Her voice rose and fell as she read, telling tales of adventure and magic, and her children hung on every word. After the children were asleep, Faith and Kade sat together in the kitchen, enjoying the quiet of the evening. Kade was carving a new toy horse for Samuel, and Faith was mending one of Lily's dresses that had torn during the day's play. "I received a letter from my brother today," Kade mentioned. "He wants to visit this summer, bring his family out to meet you and the children." Faith looked up from her sewing. "How do you feel about that?" Kade was quiet for a moment, his knife pausing in its work. "I am not sure. We have not seen each other in almost 7 years. A lot has changed." "You have changed," Faith observed. "You are not the man who felt he had to leave to avoid conflict. You have built your own success, your own family, your own life. Maybe he needs to see that." "Maybe," Kade agreed. "Will you be all right with it? having guests for an extended visit, Faith smiled. Kade, I speak to dozens of people every week now. I help with the church social, I participate in the quilting circle, I serve on the school board. I am not that silent, frightened woman anymore. I can handle a visit from your brother. When Kade's brother Marcus arrived with his wife and 3 children in July, there was initial awkwardness. Marcus clearly expected to find Kade struggling, making do with less. Instead, he found a well-run ranch, a comfortable home, and a happy family. Over dinner the first night, Marcus mentioned their father's ranch several times, talking about how successful it had become under his management. Faith could see Kade growing tense, falling into old patterns of feeling inadequate. She reached under the table and squeezed his hand, then spoke up clearly. You must be very proud of what you have built, Marcus. Kade is proud of what he has built too. It is not as large as your operation, but it is completely his own, built with his own hands and his own vision. I think that is quite an accomplishment. Marcus looked surprised that she had spoken so directly, and even more surprised when Kade straightened in his chair and said, Faith is right. I am proud of what we have here. It might not be the biggest ranch in California, but it is ours, and it is exactly what we want it to be. The visit went more smoothly after that. Marcus seemed to realize that Kade did not need his approval anymore. And once that dynamic shifted, they were able to relate to each other as equals rather than as dominant older brother and subordinate younger brother. By the time Marcus's family left, the brothers had genuinely reconnected, making plans to write regularly and visit each other every few years. Thank you for speaking up at dinner that first night, Kade told Faith after they had left. I was falling back into old habits, and you reminded me of who I am now. We remind each other, Faith said. That is what partners do. In 1890, when Samuel was 12 and the twins were 8, Faith was surprised to find herself pregnant again. She had assumed her childbearing years were behind her, but apparently, life had other plans. This pregnancy was more difficult than her previous ones, and she spent the last 2 months on bed rest under doctor's orders. The children rose to the occasion beautifully. Samuel took on more responsibilities around the ranch, working alongside his father. The twins helped with household tasks, learning to cook simple meals and keep the house tidy. And Kade was endlessly patient and attentive, making sure Faith did not overdo it. Their youngest child, a son they named James, was born in February of 1891. He was smaller than his siblings had been, and the birth was harder on Faith, but both mother and baby ultimately came through it healthy. 4 children, Faith mused as she nursed baby James. I never imagined I would have such a full house. It suits you, Kade said, watching her with their new son. You are an amazing mother. As James grew, it became clear that he was different from his siblings in some ways. He was quieter, more reserved, slow to start talking. At first, Faith worried that something was wrong, but the doctor assured her that some children just developed at their own pace. Faith found herself uniquely equipped to parent a quieter child. She never pushed James to talk before he was ready, never made him feel like his silence was a problem. She communicated with him through gestures and expressions, through songs and stories, and gradually, in his own time, James began to find his words. You understand him better than anyone, Kade observed when James was 3. You know what it is like to have words trapped inside, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The years continued to unfold in a pattern of seasons and growth. The children grew older, taking on more responsibilities. Samuel showed a natural talent for horse training like his father, and he began helping Kade with the business more seriously. The twins were different as night and day, despite being born minutes apart. Lily was bold and adventurous, while Rose was thoughtful and gentle. James remained the quietest of the four, but he had a gift for understanding animals that rivaled even Faith's connection with them. In 1895, when Faith was 41 years old, Samuel announced that he wanted to court the daughter of a neighboring rancher. Faith felt the bittersweet pang of watching her first child grow up and begin his own journey toward adulthood. "I remember when you were born," she told him as they sat on the porch one evening. "I was so afraid I would not be a good mother because of my past, because of how hard it was for me to speak. But you taught me that love does not always need words. You taught me patience and presence. You are the best mother anyone could ask for," Samuel said earnestly. "You have always listened to us, really listened, and you taught us to listen to each other, to value everyone's voice." Faith hugged her son, blinking back tears. "Your father taught me that. He listened when no one else would, and he showed me that my voice mattered. I just tried to pass that gift along to you children." In 1897, Faith and Kade celebrated their 14th wedding anniversary. They had established a tradition of spending this day alone together, leaving the children with neighbors or family friends for one night. This year, Kade took Faith back to the mountain meadow where he had first told her he loved her. It was autumn again, and the aspen trees were gold just as they had been all those years ago. "You remember the first time I brought you here?" Kade asked as they spread a blanket on the grass. "Of course," Faith said. "You told me you were falling in love with me. I was so scared and so happy all at once." "I was terrified," Kade admitted. "I thought you might think it was too soon or that you were not ready after Thomas, but I could not keep it inside anymore." Faith leaned against him, watching the waterfall that still tumbled down the rocks. "I am so grateful you took that risk. My life would be so empty without you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the water and the wind in the trees. Then Kade said, "I have been thinking about the future. Samuel will be getting married soon, probably starting his own family. The twins are growing up so fast. Even James is already 7. Time moves quickly," Faith agreed. "I want to make sure we do not lose ourselves in the busyness of raising children and running the ranch. I want to make sure we always make time for us for this." He gestured to the meadow around them, "for talking and listening and just being together." "I want that too," Faith said. She turned to face him fully. "Kade, you saved my life. I do not mean that dramatically. I mean it literally. I was barely existing when you met me. I was going through the motions, but I was not really alive. You brought me back to life by showing me that I was still worth listening to, still worth knowing." "We saved each other," Kade corrected gently. "I was lost too in my own way, running from my brother's shadow, trying to prove something to myself. You taught me that I did not need to prove anything to anyone, that I was enough exactly as I was." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant colors, they packed up their blanket and rode back down the mountain. The next morning, they would return to their busy life with 4 children and a ranch to run. But for tonight, they were just Kade and Faith, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built a beautiful life together. Samuel married in the spring of 1898, and Faith had to wipe away tears as she watched her son exchange vows with his bride. The wedding was held at the church in Downeyville, the same church where Faith and Kade had married 15 years earlier. "He is so young," Faith whispered to Kade during the reception. "He is 20, Kade reminded her. "The same age you were when you married Thomas." Faith nodded, knowing he was right but still feeling the protective instinct of a mother. "I just want him to be happy." "He will be," Kade assured her. "We have taught him how to listen, how to communicate, how to value his partner. He has the tools he needs." In 1899, the new century loomed on the horizon. The twins were 17, preparing to graduate from the local school. Lily had announced her intention to become a teacher, while Rose wanted to train as a nurse. James, at 9 years old, had finally found his voice and now chattered constantly about horses and cattle and everything he was learning from his father. One evening that fall, as Faith and Kade sat on their porch watching the sunset, he said, "We have been married for 16 years. Can you believe it? Some days it feels like we just met," Faith said. "Other days it feels like we have been together forever." "I would not change any of it," Kade said. "Not the struggles, not the challenges, not even the hard days. It all brought us here." Faith thought about the woman she had been when they met, so broken and lost in her silence. She thought about the journey she had taken to find her voice again, not just the physical voice but her sense of self, her confidence, her place in the world. "I spent 3 years in silence," she said slowly. 3 years of being invisible, being overlooked, being treated like I did not matter. And then you came along and saw me, really saw me. Not the broken widow, not the silent shopkeeper, but me, Faith, the person underneath all that trauma. I saw someone extraordinary," Kade said. "Someone strong enough to survive the worst kind of loss, someone brave enough to keep going even when the world had written them off." "I did not feel strong or brave," Faith admitted. "I felt broken. But you were not broken. You were healing in your own way at your own pace. And when you were ready, when you felt safe enough, you emerged stronger than before." Faith reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "You gave me the space to heal. You did not try to rush me or fix me. You just loved me as I was and trusted that I would find my way." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Faith thought about how different her life had turned out from anything she could have imagined. She had loved and lost, had fallen into silence and found her voice again, had built a new life from the ashes of her old one. And through it all, Kade had been there, listening when she could not speak, hearing what she needed to say even when the words would not come, loving her through the silence and the speaking, through the fear and the healing. Their children grew and flourished. Samuel and his wife had their first child in 1900, making Faith and Kade grandparents. Lily went off to San Francisco to attend teachers' college, writing long letters home about her studies and the exciting city life. Rose apprenticed with the doctor in Downeyville, showing a natural talent for healing work. And James continued to work alongside his father on the ranch, learning everything Kade could teach him about horses and land management. In 1902, when Faith was 48 years old, she received word that Mrs. Henderson had died. Faith attended the funeral, remembering the woman who had been one of her few regular customers during those silent years. Mrs. Henderson had gossiped and complained, but she had also been one of the few people who had continued to treat Faith like a normal person, conducting business with her even when Faith could not respond verbally. At the reception after the funeral, several of the older townspeople gathered around Faith, reminiscing about the early days. "I remember when you first lost your voice," Mrs. Patterson said. "We were all so worried about you." "I remember thinking you would never speak again," added Mr. Chen, who ran the general store. "But you proved us all wrong." Faith smiled gently. "I did not prove anyone wrong. I just found my way back in my own time, and I had help." She looked across the room to where Kade was talking with some of the ranchers. "I had someone who believed in me even when I did not believe in myself." "You two have built a good life together," Mrs. Patterson observed. "4 wonderful children, a successful ranch. You should be very proud." "I am," Faith said. "But I am most proud of the fact that we built it together as true partners. Kade never tried to speak for me or make decisions for me. He always made sure I had a voice, whether I was using it or not." As the years continued to pass, Faith found herself becoming something of a mentor to other women in the community who were struggling. A young mother whose baby died found comfort in talking to Faith, who understood grief and loss. A woman whose husband had been injured in a mining accident and could no longer work found practical advice and emotional support from Faith, who remembered what it was like to have your life completely upended. "You have a gift for listening," Kade told her after she had spent an afternoon counseling a teenage girl who was struggling with family problems. "You make people feel heard in a way most people do not." "Because I know what it is like not to be heard," Faith said simply. "I know how isolating that feels, how it makes you question your own worth. So I try to give others what you gave me, the gift of being truly listened to." In 1905, Lily came home from San Francisco with a young man she wanted her parents to meet. He was a teacher at the same school where she worked, and it was clear from the way they looked at each other that they were deeply in love. "He reminds me of you," Faith told Kade after they had gone to bed that night. "Not in looks, but in the way he listens to Lily. The way he values her opinions and treats her as an equal. She learned from us what a good partnership looks like," Kade said. "Just like Samuel did, we have taught our children well." Lily married in 1906, and Rose followed a year later, marrying the young doctor who had taken over the practice in Downeyville. James, now 15, showed no interest in courting yet, being far more interested in horses than girls. "Give him time," Kade said with amusement when Faith worried about it. "He will get there eventually." As their children built their own lives and families, Faith and Kade found themselves with more time to themselves. They took long rides through the mountains, revisited old favorite spots, and enjoyed the quieter rhythm of life without young children in the house. One evening in 1908, as they celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary, Kade gave Faith a gift. It was a beautiful wooden box he had carved himself, with intricate designs of horses and mountains on the lid. "Open it," he urged. Inside, Faith found all of the notes she had written to him over the years. He had kept every single one from the very first "thank you." "Welcome to Downeyville," to the longer letters she had written when she was first learning to speak again. "I saved them all," Kade said. "Every single word you wrote to me. They tell the story of how you found your voice again, but they also tell the story of how we fell in love." Faith's eyes filled with tears as she looked through the notes, remembering those early days when writing was her only form of communication. "I had forgotten about some of these," she admitted. "I never forgot any of them," Kade said. "Each one was precious to me because it was you sharing yourself with me, trusting me with your thoughts and feelings." Faith set the box aside and moved into Kade's arms. 25 years, she murmured. "Sometimes I can hardly believe it. Sometimes I still feel like that frightened woman in the store, afraid to let anyone in." "But you are not her anymore," Kade said. "You are Faith Johnson, mother, grandmother, rancher, counselor, friend. You are strong and brave, and you have your voice. That frightened woman is part of your past, but she is not who you are now." "She is still part of me," Faith corrected. "She taught me compassion and empathy. She taught me the value of really listening. I would not be who I am without having been her." "You are right," Kade acknowledged. "I should not have dismissed her. She was surviving the best way she knew how, and she was still you, just a quieter version." They sat together in comfortable silence, a silence that was different from the one that had defined Faith's life before Kade. This was a peaceful silence, a chosen silence, a silence between two people who knew each other so well that words were not always necessary. In 1910, James, now 18, announced that he wanted to expand the horse breeding program on the ranch. He had studied everything he could find about bloodlines and breeding, and he had ideas for creating a strain of horses particularly suited to the Sierra Nevada terrain. "I think it is a wonderful idea," Faith told him. "You have your father's gift with horses and my patience. That is a powerful combination." With James taking on more responsibility for the ranch operations, Kade found himself with time to pursue other interests. He began working with the local school board, helping to establish programs for children who struggled with traditional learning methods. "I keep thinking about what you went through," he told Faith. "How the whole town just gave up on you because you did not fit their expectations of how you should be. I want to make sure no child in this community ever feels that way." Faith loved him even more for this, if that was possible. He had not only changed her life, he was working to change the lives of others who might face similar struggles. In 1912, Faith turned 58 years old. She had now lived more of her life with Kade than without him, and she could barely remember the silent years that had preceded their meeting. Her voice was strong and sure now, used regularly for talking with grandchildren, counseling community members, and discussing ranch business with Kade and James. One day, a young woman came to the ranch asking to speak with Faith. She introduced herself as Emma, and she explained that she had heard Faith's story and wanted advice. "I lost my sister 2 years ago," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Since then, I have been having trouble speaking. The words get stuck, and sometimes I just cannot make sound come out. The doctor says there is nothing physically wrong with me, but people think I am being difficult or stubborn." Faith recognized herself in this young woman's story. She invited Emma to sit on the porch and brought them both tea. "Tell me about your sister," Faith said gently. Emma began to talk, haltingly at first, then more freely. As she spoke, Faith listened with her whole being, giving Emma the same complete attention that Kade had once given her. She did not try to fix Emma or offer platitudes. She just listened. When Emma had finished talking, she looked at Faith with tears in her eyes. "Everyone else just tells me to get over it, to move on, but you understand." "I do understand," Faith confirmed. "Trauma affects people in different ways. For some of us, it affects our ability to speak. But that does not mean you will never speak freely again. It just means you need time and space to heal. And you need people who will listen to you, truly listen, in whatever way you can communicate." Faith began meeting with Emma regularly, and gradually, the young woman's voice grew stronger. Faith taught her the techniques she had learned, whispering first in private, singing, practicing with people she trusted. But more importantly, Faith provided what Emma needed most, a non-judgmental listener who understood what she was going through. "You are doing for her what I did for you," Kade observed one evening after Emma had left. "I am trying," Faith said. "No one should have to go through that alone." By 1915, Faith and Kade had been married for 32 years. They were now grandparents to 11 grandchildren, with more on the way. Their ranch had become one of the most respected horse breeding operations in Northern California, thanks largely to James's innovative breeding program. Samuel had taken over his father-in-law's ranch and was running it successfully. Lily was a head teacher at a school in San Francisco, and Rose had become a respected midwife and healer in Downeyville. All of their children were happy and successful, building their own lives while staying close to their parents. One evening, as Faith and Kade sat on their porch watching the sunset, Faith said, "Do you ever think about how different things could have been? If you had chosen a different store that day, or if I had not put the blue ribbon in my window, I think we would have found each other somehow," Kade said. "Some things are just meant to be." "I used to not believe in meant to be," Faith admitted. "After Thomas died, I thought the universe was cruel and random, but meeting you changed my mind. Maybe we were meant to find each other. Maybe I needed to go through everything I went through to become the person you would fall in love with. I would have loved you anyway, Kade said. But I understand what you mean. Our struggles make us who we are. Faith leaned her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and horses and the pine soap he used. After all these years, he still made her feel safe and cherished and heard. I love you, she said simply. Thank you for listening when no one else would. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for giving me the space to find my voice again. I love you too, Kade replied. Thank you for trusting me with your silence and your voice. Thank you for building this beautiful life with me. Thank you for teaching me what it really means to listen. As the years continued to unfold, Faith and Kade grew old together in the best possible way. They had their health, their family, their ranch, and most importantly, each other. Faith's voice never failed her again, growing stronger with each passing year. She became known throughout the community as someone who truly listened, who made people feel valued and heard. Young women would seek her out for advice, struggling families would come to her for counsel, and even hardened ranchers would open up to her about their problems because they knew she would never judge, only listen and understand. In 1920, Faith and Kade celebrated their 37th wedding anniversary. Their children threw them a party at the ranch, gathering all 4 children, their spouses, and all 14 grandchildren together for a celebration. As Faith looked around at the family she and Kade had created, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. From the silent, broken widow she had been to this woman surrounded by love and laughter, the journey had been long and sometimes difficult, but it had been worth every step. That night, after everyone had gone home and they were alone in their bedroom, Kade pulled Faith close and said, "You know what I realized today?" "What?" Faith asked. "We have built exactly the life we were meant to have. Not the life we planned or expected, but something even better. Something real and true and deeply good." Faith kissed him softly. "We built it together. That is what makes it so special." They made love that night with the tenderness and familiarity of long married partners who still cherished each other deeply. Afterwards, lying in Kade's arms, Faith felt completely at peace. In 1922, Kade fell ill with pneumonia. Faith nursed him through it with the help of Rose, who had learned much about healing over the years. For 2 weeks, they were not sure if he would survive, and Faith found herself praying desperately to the God she had questioned after Thomas's death. "Please," she whispered in the dark hours of the night, "please do not take him from me. I need him. I still need him." Kade pulled through, growing slowly stronger as spring arrived. When he was finally well enough to sit on the porch again, Faith sat beside him and took his hand. "You scared me," she said. "I scared myself," Kade admitted. "I kept thinking about all the things I still wanted to do with you, all the grandchildren I wanted to see grow up." "Then you better plan on sticking around for a long time," Faith said firmly. "We have at least another 20 years of sunsets to watch together." Kade recovered fully, and they did indeed have many more years together. They traveled a bit, visiting Samuel in the northern part of the state, spending time with Lily in San Francisco, taking trips with their grandchildren to show them the mountain meadow where Kade had first said he loved Faith. Emma, the young woman Faith had counseled years earlier, came back to visit in 1925. She was married now with children of her own, and her voice was strong and clear. "I wanted you to meet my family," Emma said, "and I wanted to thank you again for helping me find my way back. You saved my life, just like your husband saved yours." Faith hugged Emma tightly. "We saved each other. That is what people do when they truly listen and truly care." In 1928, Faith and Kade celebrated their 45th wedding anniversary. They were both in their 70s now, moving more slowly but still active and engaged with life. The ranch was fully in James's capable hands, but Kade still went out to work with the horses when he could, and Faith still counseled women who sought her wisdom. That fall, as they sat on their porch watching the leaves change color, Kade said, "I have been thinking about our legacy, what we will leave behind when we are gone." "We have our children and grandchildren," Faith said. "That is a good legacy." "It is more than that, though," Kade said. "We have shown people what it means to truly listen to each other, to value each other's voices. We have shown that silence is not the same as having nothing to say, and that love is patient enough to wait for someone to find their way back." Faith squeezed his hand. "You taught me that. You taught everyone that." "We taught each other," Kade corrected. "You taught me to pay attention to what people are not saying, to listen with more than just my ears. You taught me that the quietest voices sometimes have the most important things to say." As the sun set that evening, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, Faith thought about the journey she had taken. From the frightened, silent widow to the woman she was now, confident and vocal and surrounded by love. It had not been an easy journey, but it had been worth it. And through it all, Kade had been there, listening when she could not speak, hearing what she needed to say, loving her through silence and sound, through fear and healing, through all the ups and downs of nearly 5 decades together. "I would do it all again," Faith said suddenly. "Do what?" Kade asked. "All of it. The loss, the silence, the struggle. I would do it all again if it meant ending up here with you." Kade pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "Me too. Every single day of it." They sat together as the stars began to appear. Two people who had found each other when they both needed it most, who had built a life based on listening and understanding and unconditional love. The night air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of approaching winter, but wrapped in Kade's arms, Faith felt warm and safe and cherished. In 1932, Kade passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 75. Faith was devastated by the loss, but unlike when Thomas had died, she did not lose her voice. She grieved openly and honestly, speaking about her love for Kade, sharing memories with their children and grandchildren, ensuring that everyone understood what an extraordinary man he had been. At his funeral, Faith stood and spoke to the gathered crowd. "Kade Johnson was the best man I have ever known," she said, her voice clear and strong despite her tears. "He taught me that everyone deserves to be heard, that patience is a form of love, and that true partnership means lifting each other up. He saved my life by listening to me when I could not speak, and he gave me back my voice by showing me that I was worth hearing. I will love him until my dying day, and I will spend the rest of my life honoring his memory by continuing to listen to others the way he listened to me." There was not a dry eye in the church. Faith lived for another 8 years after Kade's death, and she spent those years exactly as he would have wanted, staying active with the ranch that James ran, spending time with her growing family, and continuing to counsel women who needed someone to truly listen to them. She told stories about Kade to her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, making sure they understood the kind of man he had been. She talked about how he had courted her with patience and understanding, how he had never pushed her to be anything other than herself, how he had shown her what true love looked like. On her own deathbed in 1940, surrounded by her children, Faith's last words were, "Tell him I am coming. Tell Kade I found my voice again, and I have so much to say to him." She died peacefully at the age of 86, reunited in whatever came next with the cowboy who had listened when no one else would, who had seen her when she was invisible, who had loved her through silence and speech and everything in between. Her children buried her next to Kade on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. On her headstone they inscribed, Faith Winters Johnson, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She was silent but never voiceless. She was heard and she made others feel heard. 1854–1940. Years later, Emma came to visit the grave with her own grandchildren. She told them the story of Faith and Kade, of how a silent widow and a patient cowboy had found each other in a small California mountain town and built a love story that changed not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone around them. She taught me that losing your voice does not mean losing yourself, Emma told her grandchildren, and that the right person will hear you even in silence. She taught me that healing takes time and that there is no shame in needing that time. Most importantly, she taught me to listen, really listen to the people around me, because everyone has something worth saying, even if they cannot always say it out loud. The ranch continued to thrive under James's management and eventually passed to his children. The house that Kade built with his own hands still stood, lovingly maintained by generations of the family. And in Downeyville and the surrounding communities, Faith and Kade's legacy lived on in the way people treated each other, in the value placed on truly listening, in the understanding that silence is not the same as having nothing to say. Their story became a legend of sorts, passed down through the family and the community. The silent widow who found her voice again through the love of a patient cowboy. The couple who showed everyone what it meant to truly hear each other. The partnership built on listening and understanding and unconditional acceptance. And every sunset that painted the Sierra Nevada mountains in brilliant colors was a reminder of the evenings they had spent together on their porch. Two souls who had found each other in the vast loneliness of the world and created something beautiful from their brokenness. They had shown that love is patient, that healing cannot be rushed, and that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is simply to listen until they find their voice again.